And we are live here in the Storycraft Cafe. I am your host, Hank Garner. Today, I am super excited to welcome in Rosa Linda Román. Rosa Linda is a member of our online community, the Storycraft Cafe at storycraft.cafe. And I had the very distinct pleasure to get to meet Rosa Linda in person a few months ago in Las Vegas. I didn't get to chat with you as much as Jacob did, Rosa Linda, but things were going on in the booth and it was crazy there that day. But it was so nice when I saw you pop up in one of our writing sprints, and I was like, I feel like I've met her before. And then we got to making all the connections and stuff. So you have an absolutely fascinating story. You spent a number of years as a broadcast journalist, which I have a very dear place in my heart for. And you also are a memoirist with your book, Losing Sight of the Shore, How to Live on a Boat Without Killing Your Family, which I think is an amazing title. And recently you have jumped in with both feet into the thriller, the mystery thriller genre. And you have published the first of a trilogy, and I believe you're very close on your second. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you're living, at least part-time, on a boat while sailing the world with your family, which blows my mind. So I said all that to say, welcome to the show, Rosa Linda. We're glad to have you today.
Thank you. It's really nice to see you again. Yeah, we had a nice time in Author Nation. I actually went and attended as both a speaker and an attendee. I was teaching about live streaming, ironically. And I was with my daughter, who was also an attendee. She's a teenager and a writer in her own right. And she was a dabble like evangelist, and she went to your table. That was the first place she brought me, and she said, "You have to meet these people. They're fantastic." And sure enough, she sold me on the software, and I've used it ever since. So
I love it. So Rosa Linda, before we dive into all the stuff we're going to get into, I love to start each conversation with a fun question, just to kind of set the tone and to get the creative juices flowing. And the one question that I've kind of settled on over the last decade, I've asked people this question all over the place, is what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller? What's the first thing you can look back on and put your finger on?
Wow. I actually think I have a very clear, I can picture it. I was sitting under the flamboyant tree in Puerto Rico. My father is from Lares, Puerto Rico, and my sister and I used to spend summers there. And we had a lot of time to chase the chickens and climb the trees, and not a lot, there was no tech back then or anything like that. And I had a notepad, and I would sit up in the pumarosa tree, which is just like a fruit that I loved. And I would sit up there with my back against, what do you call that? The trunk of the tree with my feet on the branch. And I would draw pictures and write. And I was probably 8 or 9, maybe 7. I don't know. But I was pretty young, and I don't have those books anymore, but I've been writing and keeping journals and ever since. So I guess it's a long time ago memory. I hadn't thought about that in years, so thank you for that.
I love it when people have a specific memory, like even if you have to think about it a minute, when you can trace back to a point. That's my favorite. I posit that we are a storytelling species, and if you gather a room of 100 people and you were to poll them and say, how many of you think you have a book or a story in you? I think 98 of those people would raise their hands. And then, when you start asking, well, how many have you started writing a story? And, that dwindles. And then you get down to how many have finished a book. And, usually there's 1 or 2 at most. But that doesn't discount the fact that we are storytellers by nature. And for whatever reason, that gene gets switched on with some people. And a lot of times people can point back to a specific time and place. And I love that. That's just the the writer storyteller nerd in me that just nerds out about stuff like that. But it's something I enjoy getting out of people. So uh, one another thing that I love about most writers, and over the last more than a decade, I think it's 12 or 13 years now that I've been interviewing writers and talking about books. Um, Almost 2,000 author interviews that we've done over that, and I can count on two hands for sure, probably one hand, the amount of people that their sole desire in life was to be a writer, and that everything they pursued was a pursuit toward that goal. Um, just a handful of people that they went to an MFA program and they pursued
Sure.
publishing, and that's all they ever did. Most people, the wildly vast majority of people, have a circuitous route that brought them around. Um, you spent a while in broadcast journalism, and it
Hmm.
looks like you had a great career at it. What intrigued you about journalism, and what kind of brought you to that career?
So when I went to college, I was a psychology major, and then I got
Okay.
my first D ever. And so I was like, wow, this is not for me.
Yeah.
And then through the course of taking classes in college, I actually worked at Walt Disney World for a semester
Okay.
and went to their program where they teach management and communications. So that was kind of the first seed. And when I got back, I took an elective in telecommunication. And it was like finally it was me. It was finding my place, my people, and I never stopped after that. I studied broadcasting and I worked in tiny little TV stations around the country. I worked my way up. I've worked in my first job was in Valdosta, Georgia, and I went to the University of Florida. Go Gators!
Go Gators.
And then I ended up ultimately going to Tampa, where I was a reporter, and
Okay.
I moved out west because I was recruited as a news anchor. Because I'm bilingual, some of the places where that matters, and the communities
Hmm.
where my Spanish speaking skills are helpful were like
Sure.
El Paso, Texas, Albuquerque, New Mexico. I got a job in Phoenix. And then finally, my last job was in Monterey, California. I was the main anchor at the CBS affiliate there. And then that's when my daughter was born. And after that, it was impossible for me. I know a
Mm.
lot of people do it, but for me, I
Sure.
could not be the kind of mom I wanted to be and still do broadcasting. So yeah, I've worked at TV stations around the country, and now a lot of those stories of what I've done are now making their way into my fiction, which is really fun.
I love it. I love it. Want to welcome in the members of the audience that are joining us today. B, it's good to see you as always. Derek, thank you for joining us.
Hi,
And I know
Derek.
there are several other folks joining us. Pop into the chat. Tell us where you're joining us from. We're glad that you're here and would love to hear from you. Rosa Linda, I have met quite a number of uh, folks that have worked in journalism, and funnily enough, they wind up writing um, mystery thrillers. A lot of times, there's an interesting. I don't know if it's a connection, if it's some sort of a pipeline. I don't know what it is, but one thing that I love to ask people, especially that come from the sort of background you did, is everything that we do in life tends to add certain tools to our writer toolbox. And when we are making up stories, we can pull back to this experience, or we have this thing that we have been uniquely equipped to talk about because of the career that we've had, or what we have become an expert at. Is there anything that you can directly put your hands on uh, that your time in journalism has uniquely equipped you for writing? And hello, David. Hello, NJ. Thank you guys for joining us as well.
So as far as what makes me write, what caused me to really become like to start writing in earnest was I was a reporter in Phoenix. working at the Fox affiliate there. And I was a beat reporter. I covered the most heinous crimes.
Mm,
I've been on some scenes that I can't even ever get out of my brain. And so just in terms of like why I started writing, I realized I needed some kind of creative outlet, some way to express that, some way to, besides just telling the heartbreak on the news every day,
sure.
I would go home and I started writing screenplays. I actually met a group of other people who were dabbling in writing, and we started writing short screenplays first, and
Okay.
that was just a creative outlet. It was kind of like therapy, like, okay, I'm going to
Yeah.
channel some of this into that. And then eventually I decided to write a full length screenplay, and that screenplay that I wrote back in 2000, the 2000 timeframe, made the top 5 of the New York International Latino Film Festival back in 2001. I basically was channeling those experiences into the writing process. And yeah, and that book actually is that screenplay I now have converted, and that's the novel that I just released. As far as the, like the, I guess what I can include in my book from my experience, besides the trauma and interesting, creepy stories in the thriller genre, I feel like it really helps me to tell make the character authentic, because I've been there, I've lived it, and I know,
Yeah.
and I make some mistakes. I mean, I just had one of my beta readers for my second book point out that I had a certain term wrong. Well, it's been 20 years since I've been in the business, so
Sure.
it is
Yeah.
fair to think that there's going to be some errors, and I do my research. But I do think that that's part of it, is the ability to
Yeah.
research something and know that I try to get the facts right. I'm not
Yeah.
perfect, but that
Sure.
I do carry over the reporter in me and the journalistic side of myself into my writing.
Yeah. I don't want to speak for you, and I want to get your opinion on this, but I have had some experiences in my life where we've had some family tragedy and things like that. And I wrote a book to help me process that, and so that I could see an ending to the situation that could have turned out differently than it did. But it helped me to feel like I was in control in a way. And even saying those words, it just feels so weird because that's not exactly what was happening. But
Right,
in the end, you could look back and you could say, well, I could see why, where this came from.
for
And
sure.
yeah, yeah, and I would only imagine, and please correct me if I'm getting this wrong, but as a journalist who's covering these things, and you see the most heinous of heinous, and none of it makes sense, and especially we know how slowly the justice system can work. And
Right.
yeah, and you're just left with these images and these feelings. And as a writer, at least you can control your corner of the universe. Does writing help to kind of process the trauma of
For
having to
sure.
witness it and report on it?
Yeah, and I think for me, the interesting thing that's coming up now that I'm full-time writing, because I
Yeah.
had always done, well, first of all my writing was always factual, like I was covering other people's stories.
Yeah.
So
Right.
moving into the place where I gave myself permission to make stuff up has been new challenge for me, because I'm like, okay, am I allowed to say that? Because, it's not fact. Um,
Right.
but as you're working through these things, I find that it I'm surprised by how much is still in there, because I
Mhm.
figured, well, I've been out of the business for 20 years. I've had a whole different life living on boats and raising 3 fantastic kids. I did not think any of this was still in there. But as I've been writing this trilogy, it all is coming back. There's these
It's
scenarios that
always in
come
there,
back, and
isn't
I
it?
realize,
Yeah.
wow, they're still in there. And it's
Yeah.
really, it's still quite visceral in my
Mhm.
mind. And so when I'm writing, I'm able to write in a way that feels authentic. It feels like, oh yeah, I could totally relate to that. Yeah, it's a strange phenomenon, because I find myself, the world is in a wild place right now, and I find myself touching a nerve, like, oh, I didn't realize
Mm,
that was still tender there,
right.
as I'm writing a scene. And yeah, it's good though. It's perfect fodder for writing thrillers.
Sure it is. Sure it is. As a journalist, you are told to stick to the facts, just the facts, ma'am.
Right.
No embellishment. We know that that all kind of trouble comes from um, journalists and reporters who place themselves too closely to the subject matter, and and things can go awry very quickly. I
Yeah.
would think, as you just alluded to, that would be a very difficult hurdle to cross when you then start writing
Huge.
fiction, because it's been ingrained in you that we stick to the facts, we report it as we see it,
Right.
let the chips fall where they may, we're here to report. But then you get to well, maybe it didn't happen quite that way,
Right.
maybe that this person responded this way. And
Yeah.
I what was that, what was the thing that helped you to break that barrier, to feel the freedom to embellish and explore and all of that? Because in my mind, I imagine you sweating at the keyboard, and finally there's a
Hmm.
breakthrough moment. Was it that dramatic, or are you just
Um,
threw caution
I'm
to the wind?
gonna honestly say it was my husband saying, "Okay, enough of this. I've been writing Death Wounds, the book that just was
Yeah,
released, for 25 years." And it was him saying, "At some point, you have to take the leap."
yeah,
And he was right. When I was writing the memoir, it was like, and even some of my friends, because it was basically, I wrote the memoir, I put it out, and it was kind of like just family and friends. A
yeah,
few people, discovered it, and a few of my friends pointed out, yeah, it's like you told us exactly, how it was, and that was factual reporting. So that was scary to publish that book, but it wasn't terrifying
yeah.
because it
I mean,
was
it is what it is.
truthful. It
Yeah,
was it was what happened. It was my journals. It was very
sure.
fact based. Moving it into the realm, so Death Wounds, and each of my stories is based on a story that I actually covered. So
Okay.
for example, Death Wounds was when I was a reporter in Valdosta, Georgia. At the tail end of when I got there, I there was a local sheriff who was stockpiling military surplus property for his private militia. I didn't really cover the story per se, but I was like, huh, that's crazy.
Yeah.
He was on trial for that, and so that was stored away in the back of my mind. So once I started writing it, and the characters started kind of talking to me, like, oh well, what would happen if you went with this and took this direction? Writing it was really challenging for me because I felt like I was waiting for someone to give me permission to make
Mhm.
this stuff up.
Sure.
and
Yeah.
and I'm like, but nobody's giving me permission. I guess I have to give myself permission. So yeah, there was a very big crisis of identity, for me to say, okay, yes, I'm a reporter, and I'm going to keep, like, I believe in, like, having to ask permission to suspend disbelief, but at the same time, at some point you have to make up the characters, and people, they're the voices in your head now.
Yeah.
So yeah, that giving oneself permission, I think, is, I don't know, I mean, I've talked to a lot of independent journalists and authors now, and it seems like that's one of the hardest things, because we're so used to, I check with my editor, I check with the news director, I checked with, is this all factually okay? And now I check with my line editor to make sure I have it grammatically correct, but
Right.
the choices in the story are mine, and that's
Right.
really, it's freeing and a bit scary altogether.
Yeah. And I'm going to get back to that memoir in just a minute. But you keep saying these provocative things that make me want to take the conversation in a different direction. And as Derek commented just a minute ago, and that memoir is a wonderful read. I've read about
Oh,
half of
thank
it, and
you.
it's fantastic. I agree with you, Derek. But Death
Thank you.
Wounds, you said that you'd been writing on this book for 25 years. And one thing that I'm familiar with is that when you hold on to a story for so long without publishing it, it gets harder and harder to publish, because it kind of becomes a part of who you are, and these characters are safe, locked inside your mind and your heart, and they become very precious to you, and at a point you don't want to share this story with anyone else because it's all yours, and it's just wrapped up in this tight little cocoon. But there comes a point where you've got to put the thing out there and
Right.
let the chips fall where they may, and let people have an opinion about it, as hard as that is. What was that final push to get the story out there and to wrap it up and say, okay, I'm going to do it?
Yeah, I've been in since I left the broadcasting business. I've been working since 2007 in podcasting and live streaming and doing all these different businesses, and I've
Hmm.
never made any money. I always was doing stories independently. I have a business that I created. And I got to a point where I was like, wow, I am doing a lot of work all the time. I had a coach once tell me it was like a full-time jobby, a hobby that looked like a job.
Mm,
And I realized I'm reaching this new stage in life. My daughter is off to college. My second daughter is hot on her heels. My son's only a few years behind that. And I realized I'm moving into this next chapter of my life. Do I want to keep doing these jobbies where I'm dabbling in this and working on that? And I put a lot of time into it, but to what end? And I had a really good friend say to me, I was kind of really stressing because I was teaching this podcasting class and I, again, wasn't making any money. And I was just spending a lot of time away from my family to do these things. And she said, I think you should pause everything that you're doing, just everything, and see what you miss. And the reason I wanted to tell this story is because at the beginning, when you said you think we're storytellers, the one thing that I came back to was that I missed storytelling. That
mm,
was the thing. When I stopped, I paused everything. That's what I came back to. And so then I looked at it and I said, okay, well, if I'm replacing my businesses and all of these things that I've been working on with my writing and my storytelling, then I can't have it. I always picture it like Gollum, like my precious, and I'm hoarding it and hiding it and nobody's allowed to see it.
right.
And that, like, what's that for?
Yeah.
In the end, I realized I have to treat it like a business. And then I had discovered this wonderful group called 20 Books to 50K.
Right.
And I just happened to be gifted a ticket to their conference, not last year, but the one before. And that opened my eyes to the fact that at some point, you it's not fair. It's almost like if you're given this gift that you can tell this story, it's not just your story. Other people have a right to it, if you will. Like, yes, I could have it be the thing my child discovers after I'm dead, but what about all the
Hmm.
people who would have loved to read that story? It's almost yeah, it's selfish to keep it to myself. And
Yeah.
so I decided then and there, if I'm going to pursue this and I'm going to take it seriously, I'm going to treat it like a business. And that has been transformative for me. It forced me to pick a date to when I was going to publish it, which was terrifying. And then, but it kind of kicked in my reporter background. And it's like, well, I have
Yeah.
a deadline. I can't
Right.
not meet that deadline. And that changed everything. At that point, I got out of my head. I finished the writing of it, and now book two comes out at the end of this month. I mean, it's book three of mine, but book two of the trilogies.
I
So,
love it. I love it. And we're going to come back to Death Wounds in just a minute,
okay.
and the books that are making up Catalina's Chronicles.
Yeah.
But before we come back to that, let's talk a little bit more about this memoir, Losing Sight of the Shore: How to Live on a Boat Without Killing Your Family. The memoir uh, is here because of this great collection of life experiences that you've had living on a boat with three kids, a husband, and a German shepherd of all things. Where did this come from? And when you get this wild idea, how do you practically move onto a boat while keeping up careers, and like how
Yeah.
does all that
Yeah.
work?
Well, I had left my career back when my first daughter was born in 2005, and then 2007. By then, I had two kids. My husband actually was late in his career. He was a mechanical engineer, and then at 40, he decided to go to medical school. He started working, and it was like everybody wanted him. He was in high demand. The stress was really hard on all of us, and we had two little girls. And from that, after he had kind of a heart scare, we were like, okay, you know what? We need to get our priorities in order. And we had always looked at boats just when we were on vacation and looking at options. And so ultimately we were in Florida on a vacation, and we went and looked at boats, and we met a broker, and he was like, oh, well, he kept like, let me show you this boat. Let me show you this boat. And before we knew it, we started seriously considering, like, what would that be like just to spend some time living on a boat with our two little girls. At the time they were no, 2 and 4 when we first moved on. Our first boat was called Hakuna Matata, and
Of course it
we
is.
sailed it from
Yeah.
sailed it from Florida to the Bahamas. And yeah, that was the beginning, and we realized it was the best time we had as a family because we disconnected. Back then they didn't have Starlink and all of this stuff that
Sure.
made you constantly connected, and so we were able to be fully present as a family. And I feel like it taught us all how to be independent, and I could see the effect on my children and
Mm.
my relationship with my husband. Yeah, it was a good thing. And so we did that for a year until little Mr. Samuel came along, and he, because I was pregnant, I could not be on some remote island, and so we ended up moving back to New Mexico, and we ended up not doing another boat until he was 5. And my story for that is because when I would say to the girls, okay, do not go outside this cabin without a life vest on, and they would every time put it on, okay, mommy, and they would put on their life vest. With Samuel, it felt like he was like, okay, mommy, same thing. But then he would see something shiny and like be over without a life vest on. And it was just a little scarier. So we waited a
Yeah.
little longer. And by the time Samuel was 5, we moved on to the boat called the Dawn Treader. And that boat we had the most family experiences on. We did that for a few years.
And your voyages upon the Dawn Treader, and that's a little nod back to
Thank you for
Narnia
getting that
there.
reference.
Yeah, that's as I'm looking at my 50th anniversary collection of Narnia right above my desk right
Now
here.
I have to
Um,
pull mine down. Can I do that? Also, same.
I'm yes, and here's my Voyage of the Dawn Treader
Yes.
right there from my
It's like an
50th
old school
anniversary.
copy. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
it's the
awesome.
this was the collection that came out around 2001, I think. 2001. I bought those for our kids at the time when they were
I
all little.
love it.
Anyway,
I love it.
that's beside the point. But I couldn't let a Voyage of the Dawn Treader reference go unnoticed.
For
So,
sure.
yeah. Um, so, well, first off, when you're living on the boat for that first year, and you're making these connections with your family, and everything is great, and then you move back to dry land. While you're in the experience, everything is wonderful, and you've got all these lovely feelings. But then when you get on dry land, was it like, oh wow, that was an experience, but thank God we can all spread out a little bit. And what did you have any of those feelings, or were you
Um,
longing to get back?
so back then I was more the caged tiger who wanted to get out. um, I I always, for me, if ever given the choice, I will always choose the ocean.
Okay,
My husband is more the mountain man, and so it we
understood.
decided if this is going to work for us, we're going to take turns. And so we did a stint for those several years in the mountains,
Hmm.
and I was ready to get back. I'm always ready to get back to the boat. We Not everyone in the family wants to always be on a boat. Right now,
Right.
we kind of, like I said, we take turns, and
Hmm.
with each child, like our oldest daughter wanted to be back on land because she wanted to go to the Naval Academy and she needed to
Okay.
have some brick and mortar experiences.
Sure.
Our middle daughter, who is one semester away from going off to college herself, is more of the she wants to go have these adventures. So that's why we're going back to the boat and why we did the boat last semester. My son is not convinced either. He does not want to ever leave New Mexico. So we'll see how that goes. His turn will be next.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think part of it is I saw the benefit of boat life because it isn't easy.
Yeah.
It really is a hard life. You have to learn how to manage your own sewer and water and power. And when things break, you don't have, you know, I don't know, Home Depot around the corner
Right.
to help you with things or to be able to hire an electrician. So I watched my kids learning skills from their daddy, who's an engineer doctor, learning skills from me, who's a communications person and
Right.
other things. And I feel like could they have gotten them while we were on land? 100%. There's lots of different
Yeah.
ways people do that.
Sure.
But for us, it was almost like speeding up the process. Like, okay, let's have this intensive family experience, which is very difficult. And I always say the best thing and the worst thing about living on the boat are the same, that you have nowhere to get away from the people
Right.
that you love. And
Right.
so you're forced to deal with conflict very quickly because there's no where for it to
You-
fester. You can't hold
Exactly.
grudges, but
Yeah.
that means you have a lot of intense conversations while you're living on that boat.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Memoir. I'm always fascinated with memoir. It differs from autobiography. Autobiography tends to be kind of a cradle to grave look at a person's life, and there's there's the highs and lows, and there's the big picture. Memoir, it seems to me, is a glimpse into a window of a life, and it usually has a defined purpose, a defined window of time, and there's a narrative thread that tends to run through the story of a memoir, typically, from my observation. I'm not talking about any sort of research or anything into it, but this is just what I've picked up from it. um, when and there's usually a theme that a pretty strong theme that runs through memoir. When you're thinking about writing the story of your family's travels, how did you pick the window that you would look through? And were there themes that emerged in the beginning? What was there a certain aspect to this experience that you wanted to highlight? How did you start thinking about telling this portion of your family story?
Well, part of it told itself because
Okay.
as we were traveling, I kept a first mate's log very sporadically, but I keep journals. And so some of the story formed just because it was what our experience was. But I wrote the majority of the memoir as part of NaNoWriMo, which I had just discovered when
Sure.
we had sold the boat. I
Okay.
did not want to sell the boat. I
Now,
was a
now
little
was this
bitter
boat
about
one,
selling the
two, or
boat.
three? Was this boat
Say
one,
again?
two, or three? Was this boat one, two, or
Two,
three?
boat
Okay.
two,
The
Don
Dawn
Treader. And
Treader.
by the way, we actually did Don Treader twice. We
Okay.
sold the boat, and so this is right after we first sold her in 2018. And we moved to Texas, Austin, because my husband had a job project there. He was ready
Okay.
to back up his career, and so we were landlocked in a neighborhood we had never lived in before. It was actually the first time we'd lived in a neighborhood, so it was a totally different experience for us. And while the kids, had their various school and
Hmm.
things, I started busying myself writing again. And when I was writing that, and I discovered NaNoWriMo, I pulled my journals. I started kind of telling the story. And I think a lot of what's in the memoir was how I processed sharing a life and partnership with someone who's very different than you. And also discovering your children are very different than you too, because I think when they're little, you think, oh, they're just little offshoots of of their parents, and
Right.
then as they become their own people, you realize we're really just here to guide each other and support each other and try not to dull each other's shine.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think that theme came up a lot as I was writing, discovering that I was, I was not happy that we sold the boat, and so I was mad at my husband. And how did I process that? How did I process? I did leave my career to be the full-time stay-at-home mom. Where did that leave me? And so there was a lot of like soul searching, doing my own work, realizing like, okay, whether I'm on land or at sea, the only thing I know for sure is I take me with me,
Yeah.
So like that theme of like processing how you're interacting and dealing with your most beloved in tight quarters, I think that came up again and again.
How do you define the window that defines the memoir? With there's a beginning and an end, and you're looking at a certain time period, a certain arc of this. How do you define what the arc of this story is going to be?
Well, it was easier for me because we only stayed on that boat for that time, for a certain
Okay.
finite period of time. So I was able to, I did bring in the original Hakuna Matata time and some of the post Dawn Treader 1.0 time, because we ended up later during COVID buying the same boat back.
Oh, wow.
And that's a whole different story that maybe will be a follow-up memoir. We'll see. But it was a finite period of time
Yeah.
and really the process, are some of I was going through, changes in my life as a woman, and my daughters were going through, puberty, and like all of it in a boat all at once. That's a very intense finite period of time.
Sure.
So I think it would be hard to write a memoir like, here's my life story.
Yeah.
I think that would be very difficult. But
Yeah.
to be able to kind of pick a time, a slice, yeah, like you said, it's just a slice of your life, and to be
Yeah.
able to focus on what were the lessons I learned during that time. What are the things that people who might be considering this lifestyle, what might they need to know
Yeah.
when they attempt these things? So yeah, I think it kind of wrote like the decision of which time frame to use was pretty automatic, I think, for this
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. Well, having written, published, and marketed the memoir as its own project, and you went through the whole life cycle of that, and now you are writing, publishing, and marketing a thriller series. Uh, what do you see as differences and things that you've learned from really having one foot in each of these disparate worlds?
Yeah. Wow.
How do these two differ, and what is there anything that you've learned from one that has helped the other?
For sure. The memoir, I feel like without the memoir, I don't think the novel would have ever seen the light of day. For sure. I feel like it was the transition, between
Yeah.
my reporting life and my factual reporting life and my moving into I'm a writer kind of mentality, number one.
Hmm.
I I tested out the waters, I think, pun intended. No, I tested out the waters with the memoir to my social networks, because I did share it and I had some people read it, but all of last year I think I sold 12 copies in the entire year. So that gave me a chance to feel like learn to be okay with disappointment, first of
Sure.
all. Like, of course you think it's going to sell a gazillion copies, everyone's going to want it, and then you go through the process, first of all, just learning how to publish something, how to
Sure.
be an independent publisher, but also the process of, okay, I put this thing that was like a piece of my heart out into the world, and I didn't die.
Yeah.
So that
Right.
was the
Right.
memoir did that for me. And then taking it to the next level, realizing, okay, but I never did give the memoir its due, because my husband and I tended to be like, yeah, that was a cute little project, but still almost in that jobby category, like it
Hmm.
was still just dabbling with this cute thing. And then it was making the mental change to say, this is my job. This is my career. I am a full-time writer, and I'm not just a writer to keep things in my closet.
Yeah.
I'm a writer to actually put things into the world. So I do feel like the memoir did that for me. It did cause some I think there's some problems that might come from it that I don't know for sure yet, because I'm still in the first month since I published my novel. But you hear all the time, you should not switch genres, you should have a pen name if you're going to do different
Yeah.
things. I chose not to do that because I did have somewhat of a following, or
Hmm.
I had name recognition because of my broadcasting career, and because I've spent all these 20 years since leaving my broadcasting career putting content out into the world under my
Right.
name. So does that affect discoverability for my thrillers? I don't know. I don't know the
Yeah.
answer to that because I haven't yet analyzed it to that degree. But I figure, I'm I am who I am,
Right.
and the right people who like my work will find it, especially if I keep putting good work out and
Right.
communicating, with the people who are interested. So,
Well, and
yeah,
I understand all of the reasons that we talk about segmenting author pen names and all of that. I understand
sure.
all of that. But I know as a reader, I read all over the place, and to think that writers should be pigeonholed into one thing, when we as readers are not pigeonholed into what I love
Right.
reading memoirs. I love reading people's real life experience. I love reading thrillers. I love reading a good romance. I
Yeah.
I love reading, old school Agatha Christie style locked room mysteries. I love fantasy and sci-fi. And so, anyway, that's a diatribe for another time.
I know. No, it's
Yeah.
true. I think it's very fair. And I think part of me thinks, I remember back in my broadcasting days, a lot of my colleagues,
Mhm.
like early in my career, some people would say, oh, mom and pop six pack, like they were idiots, right?
Right.
And my mentors within the industry, the people who I respected as broadcast journalists, are always like, no, the people you should never assume your viewers are dumb, and you should
Right.
never treat them as if they can't figure things out. And I feel like that applies here. Like,
Yeah.
okay, yes, we might need to, share the message a few different times, but people are smart. People will find
Yeah.
out, and if they like your work, they will find it.
Yeah.
So, I just think, yes, there are some things, because I do think, like my next series that I've already written a good deal of, will be controversial, and I'm
Mhm.
debating whether or not to do that in my own name.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I feel like this is my body of work in the world, and I don't know, it's
Yeah.
my name, it's who I am.
Well, and part of the problem, I say problem, I mean, these are all things that we're all discovering in real time, so,
Sure.
but in publishing, we have this idea that we have a finite window of time when we release a book, and it's gonna do the majority of its sales within this certain window, and we have to capitalize on this, and all of that may be true, but how many authors, if we pull the lens back a little bit and get a better look at history, how many authors, put out a whole body of work and didn't get really appreciated until later in life, or when they had all of this out, and it took a while for the reading public to catch up to them, and we just, I feel like we put unreal expectations on publishing sometimes, and I understand that there are things that you can do to gas the machine and all of
Yeah,
that, and I'm not discounting that at all. Don't hear me
sure.
say that,
No,
but
agreed.
I just think some perspective is never a bad thing, and if we're writing because we feel like we have something to say and we have stories that we appreciate and we think other people will appreciate. Find a way to take the pressure off of that and just, write what you love, publish what you love.
It's so good. That's so
Yeah,
good because just this morning I was sitting. So I've already gotten through book 2 is already done. I'm just finishing up the last minute line edit, and
yeah,
that'll go out the end of February. Book 3 is well on its way and is going out at the end of May. No,
yeah,
March, end of March. And as I realized, and this is something new to me, I've never really gone through this, but I realized, wow, I have a lot of other people's opinions swirling around as I'm writing.
yes,
Like, and this is why your writing sprints have been so helpful to me, because when you're doing a writing sprint, and for anyone that's watching that doesn't know what that is, basically you set a timer and you just have to get as many words as you can, and you're
right,
actually competing against the people in the room with you
right,
virtually.
yeah,
And it's fantastic because you get out of your own head. Well,
yes,
I realized what I was doing, and just this morning I took a deep breath and I went, oh, I am worrying about what X person might think, or what Z person might think, or or what if I write this character like this, will somebody be offended? And I had all of these other all these other people in the
right,
kitchen cooking with me, even though I know how to write this, but
yeah.
I got in that overthinking it, trying to worry about everyone else, and so I finally just let that go and said, no, 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 I'm going to write the story that I'm writing and the story that I have, and then yes, that people can give their opinions. And by the way, I choose not to read my feedback, my reviews, because I'm like, I don't really think I can handle that yet.
And you might never be able to handle it. It's just
Well, and that's what I have a husband for. He checks it, and
right.
if there's like if 4 different people say, that page 24 is missing an entire section, I need
That's
to know that.
information that
Yes.
you need to know, right?
Right,
Well,
right. But
I
other
heard
than
some
that, I don't need people like telling me they hate me and are mean, and I don't do well with
right,
that.
right, yeah. Well, I got some pretty good advice from someone one time. They said, if you read reviews, don't believe any of the 1 stars and don't believe any of the 5 stars. The 5 stars are all overhyping you, and the 1 stars have another bone to pick that has nothing to do with you. The truth is in the middle there somewhere,
Yeah.
but you're
That's
better
good
off.
advice for life,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah, you're right, right, right. But if you have a husband to read them for you, by all means, stay away
Yeah,
from it.
for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
So, so the memoirs out there now, you have Death Wounds is out there, and Pyro Pastor, which I love the title of that,
Thank you.
is up for pre-order and comes out in just a couple of weeks. And then you said book number 3 is coming out the end of next month.
Yeah.
When you got the wheels rolling on this first story that you had written for a while, needed to be whipped into shape and to be put out there, how did you develop a plan for a trilogy? And you mentioned the $20 to 50K group, which
Yeah.
is a phenomenal group, and Craig Martell, who headed that
Yeah.
up forever. It's a wonderful
And
friend of
Michael
mine,
Anderle
and
too. Yeah.
Michael Anderle. Yes, those guys have done the Lord's work forever. Um,
For sure.
but how did you start envisioning this series, and how did you get a plan together? Kind of, when you decided, okay, I'm going to do this. What were the steps? What were the actions that you took that put this in motion?
So even though I've been writing the Death Wounds for 25 years, it was
Hmm.
actually a complete story back in 2001 when it was a screenplay. So the first thing that I did was I converted the screenplay into a novel. And that it's completely different than the story I wrote 20 years ago. It's so different. I mean, the core is the same, but the characters change. My writing, I'd like to believe, is sufficiently better
Yeah, sure.
now. And as I've started writing that story, all of a sudden, I realized how much I left unsaid. And it is a nice standalone story. You can just leave it at
Hmm.
that, and that's the end of it. But there's all these other threads that make you say, well, what about that? How can, could you do something with that? the character herself lends to more stories because, and that's what Pyropastor is. Pyropastor takes place in the middle of Death Wound, so it's really not even 2, it's like 1.5 or something.
Okay.
It's a story that she covers. She's working at a TV station in Jacksonville, Florida, and she's covering this heinous crime, which, by the way, is based on one of the worst stories I ever covered when I was a reporter in Phoenix. And so I was converting the screenplay, and I was feeling very stuck. It was like, it's torture to go, by the way. Like, going from memoir to novel is hard, but for me, going from the screenplay where you show everything visually and you're looking at the characters from kind of a wider view to going inside the character's head, because it's first person, telling their story from inside only her perspective, was really challenging. And so when I needed a break from that, knowing that I'm treating this like a business, I started writing a second story, and that's where Pyropastor came in. Because I had days where I'm like, I don't think I'll ever be able to convert this screenplay. And so then, since I said to myself, this is a business, I can't, like, I heard someone once say, like, surgeons don't have writers, the equivalent of writer's block. They don't have surgeon's block. They don't just suddenly say, no, I'm not working today. And so that's what I tell myself, like, okay, well, I have to write something. And that's where Pyropastor came in. And then once I wrote that and the two put together, it just naturally flowed to the 3. So it kind of, as I wrote the characters, I know this sounds kind of hokey, but it was like they told me, well, there's more. You're not done.
Well, I'll tell you what, we say this all the time, that writing is the one profession where you can say that you just did what the voices told you to do. And people just nod their head and go, well, of course they did.
I wonder if I should show you my dirty socks. Okay, so this says, oh yeah, they're nice and dirty. It says, I am a writer. And it says,
I love it.
I know, and it says, I make the voices in my head work for me.
I love that so hard. I love that so much. That is amazing.
Where else can you do that?
Where else can you do that? And you can say that in mixed company, and people just say, yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I get it.
Any other profession, if an accountant says, I just do what the voices tell me, you're going to get a visit from someone. That's
right. That's right.
Yeah.
The other pair of socks says, careful, or you'll end up in my novel.
Yes. I have a couple of stickers on my laptop that say that if I'm writing somewhere and someone bugs me, I just point to it and say, yeah, keep talking. You're going to wind up, you're going to wind up as a body somewhere.
That's so great.
Yeah. Well, the first book is out now, Death Wounds, as well as your memoir, and Pyropastor comes out in a couple of weeks, the end of February. That's right?
Yep. February 28th, the last day.
Love it. And then what is the title of book 3?
So I've been wrestling with that for a long time.
Okay.
That's why I didn't put the pre-order up. It used to be called Can't Buy China, but then I realized that's the next series. I'm really moving into the China series after this. And then I did this whole word map and ideas. Yeah. So I've settled on Lethal Bonds. That is the third book. I was going to call it Life Scars to go with Death Wounds, Life Scars, but it's kind of a continuation but different story. So Lethal Bonds is what I settled on.
Okay. And you alluded to the second series that have you begun working on that, or is it just in the formulation?
That's the big one.
Okay. So what is your daily writing process like at this point? Because you're committed to getting this done, to cranking these books out. Where do you find yourself these days, and getting, making sure all these people that live in your head are getting down on the page, and you're meeting reader demand? Well,
and especially the question applies when you're traveling full time with your family.
Right.
How do you write?
Exactly.
And my answer, and the best answer, is I have to make the time, and I have to. It took a while for me to teach my family, because I've always been doing projects, but every project that I've done up until now could stop. if the kids needed something, if somebody had something they wanted, to work through or whatever. Some now that I have a deadline, have deadlines again that matter to me and to my readers, I
Hmm.
make the time. I schedule it. I schedule myself 2 block hours of time several times a day, starting when I wake up at 5 and do my writing time for the first 2 hours when nobody can interrupt me. Everybody's sleeping. So even if I'm on a boat, I wake up at 5. I write for 2 hours. I really like the writing sprint idea. So I
Hmm.
squeeze in, I'll do like a 2 hour block. I actually started after doing your dabble writing sprints. I started scheduling that for myself again because I did the math and I realized, okay, in order to meet the goals that I have for these books, I'm going to need to get a lot more words in. I was kind of sticking to between like 500 and 1,000 words
Hmm.
a day, 5 days a week. But to meet the goal that I have, it really needed to be closer to 2,000. So I had to shift to this is my daily work. This is the work that I do. I don't work on Saturdays, but I try to write 6 days a week. So,
Love it. And those writing sprints that we host are Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday at 12:30 Eastern time. And you can find those over at storycraft.cafe. And Rosalinda, I know that you've posted some of your writing sprints over there. And
yes.
Abby, our fantastic new community manager, when someone posts that they're going to host a writing sprint at whatever time's convenient for them, she tries to pin those to the top so that other folks can join. So if you're ever looking for a group of folks to write with, go over to storycraft.cafe. You might see one of ours, you might see something that Rosalinda has posted or someone else, but there's always a group of writers that are looking for folks to challenge themselves with.
Well, and
Rosalinda,
it's
this
so
is
cool the way
yeah,
that you guys have the little countdown and then it tracks. So like if
yes.
somebody watching is in the same room, we are like competing against each other, but
Yes.
it's really
and
competing
that's
against
and
yourself.
we use wordsprints.org, which is a tool that's developed by the Dabble developers and as an
Amazing.
kind of an adjunct, a fun place for people to meet and write, and it's free for everyone. So
Yeah.
wordsprints.org, just jump in, challenge some friends, and have at it. Rosalinda, this has been so much fun chatting. Pyropaster comes out the end of the month. Right now, Death Wounds and Losing Sight of the Shore is available. You can go grab those now. If folks are just discovering you and want to dig into all the stuff that you're up to and follow along for new release news and all of that, where is the best place for them to follow you?
So I do have a Substack, and it
Okay.
is rosalindaroman.substack.com. If you can't remember that, my name, rosalindaroman.com, and then it'll take you to that.
Excellent. And we'll link that up in the show notes to make it easier for folks to find you. Rosalinda, this has been so amazing getting to
Thank
hang
you.
out, and thank you for all that you
Same.
do, and thank you for sharing with us today.
Thank you so much. It means a lot to me, and it was so fun. I love your community, and I'm super honored to be a part of it.
Well, thank you all for joining us today. We'll
Bye, everyone.
see you next time.